Disclaimer. The content of this podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical, psychological, or legal advice. This podcast may feature discussions about accessibility, technology, and personal stories. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast hosts or producers. Listener discretion is advised, as some topics may be sensitive or triggering for individuals. If you have questions or concerns about any content, feel free to reach out to us directly.
Victoria Clare, who's lost almost all of her vision to the disease retinitis pigmentosa.
True vision isn't about what the eyes can see, but what the heart and hands can create. This powerful belief defines our next guest and her extraordinary journey. Dr. Victoria Clare. She's a sculptor whose resilience and creativity have transformed her personal challenges into a lifelong mission of artistic expression and advocacy for people with visual impairments. Dr. Victoria was diagnosed with a condition called retinitis pigmentosa. She talks about how there needs to be more awareness around accessibility for people with visual impairments and how her work is a beacon of hope for them. In this conversation, she would also share her love for surfing in the water, playing basketball, and also skateboarding. She's truly an inspiration for all of us.
How are you doing today, first of all? Tell me, how has your week been? Has it been a busy one?
It has been, obviously, getting here. Travelling down on Sunday. I had a 5.5 hour journey because my trains were delayed from Kent. So that was a bit full on. Yesterday was better because I swapped my work day from yesterday to today, which is gave me a little bit of free time just to kind of, relax a bit after such a big journey on Sunday.
Victoria, when you're around in the town, how do you like to spend your time? Do you like walking around? Do you just stroll on your own? Or how do you explore when you are traveling from Kent to Bolton, of course, to the northwest?
It's basically, at the end of the day, wherever I go, whatever I'm up to, if it's in a new environment, I have to be trained to navigate that environment. So basically that means getting in touch, which is for me guide dogs. They have mobility trainers. I got in touch last February when I started to work in Bolton in March. I got in touch with Guide Dogs Mobility. They set me up with an appointment with a lovely guy called Alex, and he did some training with me in terms of navigational skills from the train station to my hotel, the train station to Bolton University, and also navigating myself around the hotel.
It's pretty impressive that you have over 250 sculpting works and several exhibitions throughout Europe, in England. So I just wanted to ask, so when you go to a new town, how does it work? Do you get training or guide dogs or help from organizations to every new town that you travel?
If it's for work-based such as this, and I'm spending a good chunk of time, then yes, it's always wise to put in mobility training from guide dogs.
Okay.
If it's a one-off visit, say to a particular gallery, then I might have sighted support with me that may be willing to help, like a close friend, etc., or member of family. But to be fair, 9 times out of 10, the galleries for which I've shown, of course, over many, many years, so as you can imagine, my exhibiting career spans 15 years. My whole career as a sculptor spans 30. My sight loss is progressive, so basically that means that I wasn't born blind. I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa when I was 19. It's a degenerative disease, also genetic, of the retinal dystrophy. So the back of the retina is rods and cones, and they, unfortunately, the rods and cone receptors die. And in a healthy eye, they rejuvenate, but in retinitis pigmentosa eye, they die. Hence, as they die, the progression continues and just deteriorates. So over the career, I guess my vision has been better. I'm most certainly in the final stages of sight loss, which for me is light perception and movement.
Okay.
So in the earlier stages, of course, mobility wasn't, such an issue for me. Navigation wasn't such an issue for me. But it's certainly become much more apparent over the past kind of 5 to 7 years.
Victoria, when you first discovered, your age was 19.
Yes.
And in the UK, more than 2 million people are living in with some sort of sight loss. And around 340,000 are registered blind or
That's correct.
partially blind.
Yeah.
And age factor is that people, when they get a lot older, say in their 70s, late 60s,
Yes.
that's when they discover, they discover that they have some sort of sight loss.
Yes.
But it happened to you when you were 19.
Yes. So I used to drive. I had a car, and I was in art college studying at the time a graphic design national diploma, and I passed my driving test, and I wanted to go out in my car to visit the person I was with at the time. It was dark. I'd never driven at night, purely circumstantial. It was always my lessons were during the day. And I got in my car to go and tell my boyfriend at the time, and it was very apparent to me that I shouldn't be driving. I could not see enough. I pulled out onto the road. I was too far central in the central reservation part of the road, going round parked cars, and my wing mirror was clipped. My windows were open because it was December and I was trying to demist the car, and the wing mirror broke into pieces and smashed into myself through the window, which was a bit of a shock. And from that moment onwards, I kind of realised, okay, something's wrong here. So I went to a local optician who actually is a consultant as well, which was rather fortunate. He then did about 2.5 hours, 3 hours of testing. I knew something wasn't right beyond an hour and a half. And at the end of the testing, he sat me down and basically told me, I'm really sorry, but you're going to go blind. And that is the exact words he used. He then told me why I was going to go blind and told me about the disease itself. But from that moment onwards, to be honest, I was in an absolute disarray. I didn't really hear what he said after you're going to go blind.
Just went blank.
Yeah, I just the room span, and it everything became very surreal.
People suffer with blindness, but when you talk about it from a perspective of empathy or sympathy, you still can't understand it, because it's just living with something. Of course, you can have respect in general for the people who are living with it. But I was speaking to my mother about this, and I was saying that we talk about disability, we talk about differently abled people and how difficult life is for them. But are there enough measures and enough things in place for them to have that different accessibility? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes,
there is that.
Yes, I think.
Blind people have not been discovered in 2024.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? Like, they have been a big part of history through centuries.
Indeed.
In different capacities, different roles. How come for different disabilities, and I know disabilities, and even if we talk about sight loss, it's so wide, it's so big, and there's so many things. But I have this question, and I think about this a lot, that you talk about all the empathy and all the sympathy, but that's not going to help people, is it?
No. What's going to help people is a greater understanding. That's not necessarily showing empathy and compassion, but to actually put practical measures in place, to make our environment as blind people, to make it more accessible. That's the first and foremost thing. I would say when travelling around as a blind person, people are just not really, they're not anywhere other than in their own heads. So they're not even using their oculocentric parts of their vision to be able to even notice you.
That someone's
cane.
blind.
Yes. And people don't step out of the way. People, generally are on their phones and not looking at what
That's
they're doing.
made things worse, hasn't
absolutely, yes. This day and age with people using phones has completely made things harder because so many people are walking around mobile with their mobiles and not really paying attention to perhaps the people around them. So that makes it harder as well. I think it is for myself as a blind person, for my colleagues, my friends that are also blind. It's taken, it really, whether you want to be an educator or not, you kind of have to be in a way, because really without us getting out and living the life that we want to live independently and, using those navigational skills that we've been taught, without doing that is not, it's quite unhelpful obviously for the blind person because they're quite isolated and don't get out, but also it's not helping the general public and society to really adapt to the needs of a blind person when out in the environment. So of course it's about awareness, creating awareness and educating society.
Victoria, you talked about people not being considerate enough, and you talked about sympathy and empathy. I just wanted to ask you that, are you okay with people being sympathetic? Secondly, do you get annoyed when they get overly sympathetic to your situation or try to just sugarcoat or try to just...
Yes,
it's an uncomfortable feeling.
It is. I think empathy, I would say, is a better sense than sympathy.
Okay.
I think it gets a little over-investing when your choices, decisions are taken out of your hands. Because as a blind person, yes, I have a disability. However, I do also have an extremely functional brain. So I don't need people making choices and decisions for me. I'm quite capable of doing that on my own.
Sometimes sympathy stems out of ignorance.
Yes.
For example, you talked about how people are on their phones.
Yes.
So that's first sign of ignorance. Secondly, people do not also know the colors of the sticks. For example, there's a red color on the silver.
Yes.
So please correct me if I'm wrong. And I've studied first aid and, I've studied foreman driving, and people do talk about when there's a yellow stripe, where there's a red stripe, someone's deaf, someone's visually impaired, or someone's blind. So people do not also make the effort of doing that at least I should know while I'm driving if someone's going and they might have not realized that the walking lights, the token crossing has just become red, or things like those, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So that is a part that stems out of ignorance as well. If you actually give a shit about people around you, and if you actually care, rather than being sympathetic, which you should do situations and to a certain degree, not being too judgmental there, why don't you do anything about it? Like, at least be aware that, okay, these are the signs, and if someone's walking with a stick, at least I need to look in front. What do you feel about that?
It's about education. I think it stems right from primary school levels. The amount of children and families that I pass when I'm walking around, and the child will say, "Why has that lady got that stick?" or "What's she using that for?" And really, I think it is about educating the young people so that they're brought up with knowledge about visual impairment. Not just people in wheelchairs seem to be the first and foremost considered because it's a visual cue, isn't it? But then so is using a cane is a visual cue as well. And it shouldn't really matter whether the cane is fully white or the cane has got a red stripe indicating deafness and blindness. That shouldn't matter. What matters is that the cane is being used, and some kind of awareness and appropriateness needs to be put in place.
Does it get you sometimes that when those questions are asked and they say that when, nature takes your vision away, your hearing becomes sharper and you start to notice footsteps and things you wouldn't, because the mind or the brain works in a certain way.
Yes.
So what I've seen is, and I've faced this as a kid myself, and I would ask certain teachers or family members about certain questions and disabilities or anything. Sometimes those questions are just shushed.
Yes.
Have you heard those murmurs that it's nothing, just keep walking,
Yes,
stuff like that?
Absolutely. People
kids
don't,
not being...
Yeah. People don't want to, kind of highlight difficulties. People want to believe that the human existence is perfect. And unfortunately, one of my messages is, and part of my studies and part of my lecturing, is that there is no such thing as perfection. And the sooner that society realises that perfection is an illusion, we all, every single one of us, regardless as to what the adversity we may face, nobody is perfect.
I think perfection, Victoria, when we talk about perfection, that is also a sign of ignorance, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. There is. It is. Everybody has a story. Everybody has something that's happened to them, which may be seen as an adversity, no matter what that may be. It can be a physical adversity. It can be a mental and emotional adversity. But either way, it's a very real experience within human society.
In terms of, now you're a doctor. So first of all, congratulations. I know you got your doctorate this year.
I did.
So Dr. Victoria,
Thank you.
going back to your journey and going back to that horrific experience of driving at night, take me back to that night and tell me what happened then and how did you make those decisions that changed your life forever. Of course, things, you still face difficulties, but now with a different perspective to life and doing things a different way. And I'm sure that you have your ups and downs throughout this journey, because I read after 2019 you had to reassess things again. How do I move on from here? How do I do things from here? But coming back to when you were 19, which year was it?
It was 1994.
In 1994. Talk to me about what happened after you got off that road, your side mirror got clipped, and how did you break it, or how did you break the news to your boyfriend at the time?
So I carried on driving on a wing and a prayer, really, just kind of following the rear lights of the car in front of me, because that's all I could see, and managed to get myself to my boyfriend's house. Lord knows how. I think that my dear past grandfather was looking after me, and he got me there safely. But I broke the news to my boyfriend, but he was quite a practical thinker, so kind of calmed me down. Obviously I was quite emotional and extremely anxious, and he just kind of said, look, maybe it's just something as simple as you just need nighttime glasses, okay, so let's just take it one step at a time. But then I was obviously be able to get the optician appointment, which was the very next day, so I didn't have to wait very long. As I said, 3 hours later, I was told the news I was told. My mother was with me, so she heard it at the same time. I drove her back to our then home. I dropped her off on the drive, and I just drove off.
So were you okay driving in the day when
Yes.
you had that discovery? So it
Yes.
started with you struggling with the vision
Yes,
during the night, the
yes.
first experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first stage of retinitis pigmentosa is night blindness. I think really looking back on it retrospectively, that I probably had difficulties way back when I was sort of 14, 15. I kind of didn't see very well at night then, but didn't really think that, I thought everyone didn't see very well at night, so I didn't really consider it much more than that. And yeah, I drove to the beach because I live on an island, and I just cried. It felt like the bottom of my world had just been ripped out from underneath, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what my future was going to bring, and I just felt complete loss. I think that's probably the best way I can explain it.
As I said, it's even difficult to imagine. And in 1994, there are different aspects when it comes to technology and accessibility. I'm sure 30 years ago, things were even worse
Yes.
in terms of people being empathetic or showing any sort of empathy. Or maybe they were more empathetic because they were not on their phones. That's a question that we can ask on a later day. But, you know, there wasn't as much awareness that there is now. And still there is lack of it. So you spoke about university plans and you said that I wanted to go university,
Yes.
pursue art and do things that I wanted to do.
Yes.
What was life after it finally hit you that that's happened? You got over the stage of grieving. You never actually get over grieving.
No.
But in terms of what do I do next when you asked yourself that question?
So basically, I was at art college already at that point. I continued that art graphic design course. I very much was in, there's 5 stages of grief. Denial, then anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. So denial usually is the first thing that you will face, and is exactly what I did. I just denied what was happening. I just tried to carry on my everyday life as an art student, going to art college, spending time with my friends and doing my course. But over time, it became more apparent to me that this wasn't going to be an easy run. I applied to go to Staffordshire University to study figurative sculpture. There was only 28 places in the whole of Europe, and I got an unconditional place, which I still to this day am very proud of, as I didn't have the portfolio of sculptural evidence that I certainly have now. And they kind of took it on what I had and saw the potential in me, perhaps. And I was in the relationship that I was in at that time, but then the relationship broke down because of the sight loss. My then boyfriend felt that the sight loss would hold his career back and he couldn't see a future.
Victoria, do you blame him for that now at the time?
I think at the time, absolutely. It was mortifying, but I believe that everything happens for a reason. I most certainly think he was not the person to share my life with as a visually impaired person now. So the first loss, if you like, was the news of the sight loss that was coming. The second loss was the relationship breakdown. I went off to Stafford to try to do the course. It was very short-lived, and it was very apparent to me within a very short amount of time that there was no way, as an independent young woman suffering visual impairment, that I was able to continue the course. So unfortunately, I had to walk away from that. Probably even now, it's one of my Achilles heels. It is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. At that time, my parents brought me to the home, and I really, to be fair, I just went into myself. I became very isolated. I didn't know what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I couldn't see a future at all for myself. But there's only so long that you can stay in a very dark place, you know, and I say a dark place because it was a dark place. You can stay at the bottom, or you can choose to try and rise back up from that. And I suppose after about a year and a half, I began to think about actually sculpture is a very tactile and haptic medium. So hold on a second, even though I didn't get the degree from Stafford, it does not mean that I do not have the capability, because the capability is an embodied cognition in itself, and I didn't need a bit of paper to prove that. I just needed the resilience and the strength to continue to create. So I started to create a carve out of local pieces of wood, and somebody kind of said to me, you should put that in a local gallery. It was really a therapeutic thing for me, to be fair. I wasn't doing it for any kind of career, really. But I knew I loved it. I always knew that sculpture was going to be my future. I just thought at the time when I went to Stafford that I would continue in the educational role, probably doing exactly what I'm doing now as a university lecturer. That was the goal. I never really wanted to be a freelance artist, but as it happens, I put the pieces into a local gallery, they sold, and it became really apparent to me that actually, hold on a sec, I may have been diagnosed with this visual impairment, but it's not impairing my creativity. And I basically set myself up as a freelance artist and continued to sculpt.
That's absolutely wonderful, Victoria. And, it took you, how long did you say, year and a half to figure out
2 years, yeah.
what you want to do? And what was your vision like then at the time?
Yes.
And talk to me about the gradual stages of how it went over years and decades. Like, if we
Yes.
talk about through
On a
decades,
timeline, yeah.
how has the vision been and how has it affected you?
Okay.
And how at different stages, just in continuation of this
Yeah.
question, how did you constantly adapt?
Yeah. So, as you've just rightly pointed out, progressive sight loss is a continued progression. So, one is progressively losing all the time. That is a very, very hard state to be in, and I've since understood the state of threat. It is said that those that live with progressive sight loss live in a constant state of threat.
What will be my sight tomorrow?
Yeah, and hypervigilance. And I can honestly say I'm somebody that I've been in therapy for an extremely long time, still am. I'm a very big advocate of therapy. To learn about myself, to constantly adapt and really discover more about myself. So I think really from an early stage, I just realised that every time the deterioration would hit, there would be an adaptation that would need to be made. Not just on a professional level, but obviously on a daily living level as well. So as the sight kind of deteriorated, I would contact my local organisation. For me, and that's Kent Association for the Blind. I would learn the new necessary skills for that particular kind of deteriorational, area until the next time. And that's really how you just have to keep going. I did struggle with the constant change all the time, because just as you get used to how you are adapted and how you are coping with your life, it changes, and then you have to go back to square one and create more adaptations and more. It makes you very resourceful, it makes you very resilient, and it makes you somebody that actually is very flexible in the end, because it's easy to try and kind of make things static. You don't want them to move, you don't want them to progress, but actually it's beyond my control.
Okay.
So there's no point fighting it, you have to go with it.
How difficult did you find it at every stage? Because you talked about being hypervigilant. Give me an example of it, please.
I would say the hypervigilance most certainly has come in throughout the whole of this journey. This has been something that I've worked on, and it's been a very new finding, shall we say, through my self-development. But as I understand it, the hypervigilance is as if, I can be doing something on an everyday level, but I could just be on a journey walking from A to B. But the hypervigilance comes in because I know that I've had accidents in the past with, for example, said lampposts. And then you then become hypervigilant of your surroundings, because there's an element of post-traumatic stress disorder that comes in, which then puts you back into the place where you've had a bad traumatic experience. So it's a bit of a cycle. And which it can perpetuate the problem as well, because you can hold yourself back in that kind of state of memory where you had an accident, say with a lamppost, and the hypervigilance becomes extremely high. You become disengaged with your I suppose, your embodied experience as a human, because you're living, waiting for the next accident almost.
Okay, makes sense. That if I keep walking straight without actually varying my pace, slowing down and walking fast and seeing where I am, because sometimes you're walking through an area, I'm assuming, all this assumption, I have absolutely no recollection, I have absolutely no idea what it feels, but I'm just assuming, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So you have absolutely no idea what hits you next.
No.
You have absolutely no idea what kind of area you're in, whether people are crooked enough to, maybe even rob you, if that's an example of hypervigilance.
Yes.
Yes. And people are as crooked because they don't leave anyone these days.
No.
Or whether if you're looking at your phone or looking at a text or a taxi has come to pick you up, will I be safe there? Are those questions that you constantly keep asking, are the questions similar to these?
I think the questions I constantly keep asking myself is my own personal safety with having accidents. I live in a relatively safe environment, safe part of the country. I've got to be honest, if I started to engage on what other people are going to do, I honestly think it would make my life so much worse, because all I can take responsibility is for myself. I can't
take responsibility,
preempt anybody's behaviour, and I don't try to, because otherwise I think the hypervigilance would be off the scale.
It would be an extreme level of
yes.
It would be an extreme level of paranoia. It
Absolutely.
would be you won't be able to sleep and all of
No.
It's a very dark thought, isn't it? And I'm sure that it has hit you, and I'm sorry for bringing that up. In terms of your vision now, Victoria, I'm sat in front of you, right in front of you, just next to you on the table. How much of you can see or feel or see that I'm in front of you? Like, what can you visualize or...
I can't see you at all.
Okay.
I can hear your voice, so I know exactly where your voice is coming from.
Okay.
I am told that I have a very, very good sense of direction in terms of where people are talking from. I believe that's true as well. As you said, the hearing, it's a misconception to say the hearing is better. It's like a muscle. If you use it enough,
makes sense.
It gets strong.
it's like sorry to say that if it's ignorant, but it's like a muscle, the brain as well. If people use it more, then common sense would be more common.
Yes, indeed. I think now I'm doing a PhD, I understand that more and more. I'm using my brain so much more than I ever have.
When you started doing your artwork, you said that it started with blindness during the night, struggling with the vision, and then you became a sculptor, sold your first piece of art.
Yes.
So what could you see when you were producing that art, and how did it deteriorate? And also, what was the process then, and what's the process now when it comes to, because I'm sure that we all, when I close eyes, I don't have enough muscle memory of closing eyes and visualizing things, but when people visualize, they see dreams, they see things that haven't happened in the brain. So do you still see things happening from past recollection, past memory of what you have experienced? For example, you are currently a university lecturer, and how people speak, do you make perceptions of how they look in your mind as well?
Yes, well, to answer the first sort of part of your question...
Sorry, I just went a bit...
That's fine.
It's just...
I guess the adaptation that's had to be made has been a progression with the sculpting. So I could see a hell of a lot more, trust me. I mean, I can't see the sculptures I create now.
Okay.
But I could see them in my early 20s when I begun freelancing. So most certainly my work, if you look at my portfolio, you will see that the very early work is a lot more realistic.
Okay.
My work has been described by the Royal Society of Sculptors as postmodern symbolic, and also it's been said by the CEO that she felt that actually there is a grave improvement in my work as my eyes have deteriorated, which is
that's sad or that's happy?
I think that's wonderful. I think
Okay.
that's an accolade that is worth shouting about, because with sight, I was more concerned with what the vision was picking out. So I was
Okay.
more, I wanted to make things perfect. I wanted it to look perfect and feel perfect. But of course, as time has gone and as the years have ticked by, I haven't, in stages, I've had to let go of that perfectionism and allow, I suppose, my haptic embodied cognition through my hands to lead the way. And that's why the work became more symbolic. It was more about form, and it's certainly more about form and shape now than it ever was. I think that has given me a stylistic approach to my work that is quite unique. Certainly within how I create the work, which is in a very traditional reductive sculpture style, using chisels and mallets, surf forms, rasps, and then ultimately getting to the stage of sanding. That's a very, very long stage. Again, when you're creating a piece, and I've always been told, my critics always say, they want to touch the work.
Mm-hmm.
It invites them to touch it.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is great, because I want people to touch my work,
Okay.
and have always kind of advocated for that. And the more the site went, the smoother, more glassier the sort of end result would be to touch.
Okay. And what was the stage, in what year, when you knew that you cannot envision things any longer with your eyes? For example, a sculpture is in front of me,
Yes.
and throughout, say, 10, 15 years, I've been able to see blurry and foggy parts of it.
Yes. I would say probably over the past, I would say Blind as Sixth Sense, for example. I'm sure you've read all about that. The pieces were difficult for me to depict.
Okay.
I would now say, working on my restoration piece, I can't see it.
Okay.
So it's certainly since 2018 that there has been a really big dip, and I've created a collection since then, which is awaiting to kind of be turned into an exhibition. And that particular collection, I was not able to see my work when I was creating it.
You talk a lot about feel in your work, about touching the work, about using the sensory motions
Yes.
in feeling what you do and how people perceive your work.
Yes.
Because you just don't want people who are with blindness or sight loss to see your work. It's all people from all different abilities, disabilities to, of course, experience your work.
So I guess through my sculpture, I don't just want to advocate for those with blindness and educate about awareness. I want to allow the oculocentric society to engage in a non-oculocentric way, because I believe, and I teach this very much so in fine arts in Bolton, that if we can engage with our, what I call the sixth sense, which for me is an embodied inner trust in oneself, I believe there is a richer, deeper experience within our own human nature and our own human experience. So I am trying to kind of influence the sighted to let go of their sort of visual oculocentric way of living, to improve their connection to their emotional and inner self.
Love how you articulated that. Absolutely loved it. Proper way of speaking. I would never be able to speak like that, at least so well, so clear. I can never get hold of my thoughts. But, there were a couple of things when you were talking about your exhibitions on art and about people touching your art, and you love it because people have that inbuilt feeling of doing that.
Absolutely. There's an embodied experience for them that goes beyond what your vision will take in of a sculpture. And let's not forget that the medium of sculpture lends itself beautifully to tactile touch, the haptic. Why would you not want to touch it? Because that's an extension of the experience that you can have. You can't gain that information just using your eye.
It's very interesting that you said that, and you spoke about post-modernism in your art. But can I talk to you about something, and I hope I don't sound ignorant, but people have, and I'm sure you have been a person with vision and without vision. So you have seen ridiculous art forms as well, if I'm allowed to say that.
It's subjective, so art
exactly,
is subjective.
I know.
You're entitled.
Thank you. So I want your opinion on something. There's a couple of things. Firstly, I'll start off by talking about the Just Stop Oil movement or something like that, where they go to different museums and they throw, paint on wonderful pieces of art that are actually aesthetically pleasing. And before I miss it and before I forget seeing it, I have seen your work and it's aesthetically pleasing.
Thank you.
So that's a big part of how you approach anything in your life. If I am attracted to a woman, for me to be attracted to my partner, I have to have that physical attraction to be able to, build an emotional connection.
Yes.
I cannot lie. So in terms of when it comes to Just Stop Oil, people go and randomly, when people are actually enjoying art, viewing art, go and throw stuff on Mona Lisa's painting. And already things are becoming so exclusive and so restrictive. And when you read about things like those, as an artist who is, please allow me to say it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, who is struggling with sight loss, progressive sight loss, and who only can envision art through the form of touch.
Yes.
How annoying is it for you, like when you read about those things, that someone randomly goes and they have lack of knowledge of what they're doing as well, but they think that they're saving the society by throwing paint or stopping the roads or doing we'll not go into that, but just sticking to art. What's your honest perspective on that? And I want you to be as candid as possible, please.
I think it's extremely disrespectful to the artist that has produced the work. So if somebody did that to my work, I would be mortified.
Would you beat them up?
I don't know whether I'd be able to swing a right enough to see them to knock them to the floor, but I would just have to say that there is an element of, to be fair, when your work is open to touch, you're opening it to the vulnerability of being
stolen,
yes,
being destroyed.
Indeed, yes. So it's kind of like very much, you're slightly nervous anyway, in a way that it's going to get, kind of wrecked in some way. But that is part of your plan, is to allow the piece to be touched so that another, experience can be had, which is on a deeper level.
Another hyper.
Absolutely, yeah.
What was the word again? Sorry,
hypervigilant.
Other hypervigilance. Yes.
Whereas when somebody actually deliberately goes beyond that and
to destroy
something, I just wouldn't tolerate it.
Do you know what I find quite amusing as well? They do not know the story behind the art. They do not know the significance.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
Of why that art piece is there. Rightly so. Art
Yeah.
is subjective.
Absolutely.
But modern
Yeah.
art, when it comes to certain things, it is ridiculous, and that's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
And I can say it because I will share, and I'm sure that you might have read an artist, because I have a couple of things that I have to ask you in relation to the incident that I'm sharing with you. So basically, someone's bought a painting for 5 million, bought an art piece for 5 million pounds,
Yeah.
and that art piece, just envision this, Victoria, Dr. Victoria. It was an art piece that was on a wall with a banana and a duct tape to it, a blank white wall, a banana with a great duct tape, and someone bought it for 5 million pounds. And I don't think that's art. I'm so sorry.
No.
but
It's just that is your right to say so, and let's never forget, it doesn't matter what the art is. It is always, as they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But I really love that phrase, because I like to really argue the point of that, because in itself it says the eye is in the beholder.
Wow.
The beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But again, it's such an ocular-centric point of view. So, yes, we have to allow everybody to have their own personal opinion, experience with art. They will engage with it how they wish to in terms of what they feel about it, whether they want to buy it. But ultimately, me as an artist, I have to step away from being, to a degree, the creator,
Okay.
just enough, take a few kind of pigeon steps back from being the creator, just to allow people to have their own interactional opinions of what they think of the work, but without allowing that to take anything away from my own opinion of the work.
But I know that I'm sticking to this point and I'm saying it again. Don't you find it ridiculous that someone's just making so much money out of doing nothing, and it's potentially for money laundering and all sort of different things?
I think I've
Has it
been
ever sort of occurred to you that why is my art form, why is my sculptures not being sold for millions and millions? Because your work is great and aesthetically pleasing, and if people talk about beauty, life, and all of the things, it is wonderful to see an artist with
I think
retina pigmentosa.
I think you have to do it for the love. If you're in the art world for money, then you're in the wrong place.
Okay.
You have to, first and foremost, art for me has always been about the love of creating, and anything that comes beyond that is a bonus. And that's my honest opinion. I certainly did not go into sculpture. I mean, I could have continued along the graphic design commercial arts route. Obviously, that would have fallen at some point due to the deterioration of the eyesight. But, there's money to be made in commercial arts. However, I chose sculpture as an alternative route. Did I choose it to make money? No.
Okay.
I chose it to create for the love.
I won't dwell too much on modern art because I definitely have an extreme point of view, and you are answering as a pure artist. You are just putting things, you're saying a lot of things, but you're not saying anything at the same time. So that's wonderful. I mean, beyond your blindness, beyond the sight loss, you have done surfing, water sports, basketball, skateboarding. Talk to us about that.
Surfing. I first fell in love with surfing on 2014. I was putting together my first debut solo exhibition, Through the Eyes of Time, completely self-curated the whole exhibition. It was a very stressful time, and I just needed some time out. And my husband at the time used to surf when he was young, so he knew that I always wanted to surf, but I always held myself back. For example, I went travelling for a good 2 years of my life when I was in my 20s, purely to go and see the world while I still could. I remember sitting on beaches like the Point Break beach, Pipeline in Hawaii, and various beaches in Australia, Byron Bay, just thinking, oh my Lord, I'm watching all these fabulous people going in and surf, but I'll never be able to do that, you know. And I held myself back because of the sight loss, thinking that it wasn't open to me. But it was 2014 when that did become open to me, and I learnt to surf with my nephew, and I fell in love with it, and I knew I would. I just knew I would love it. And it's a sense of freedom. It's a sense of a trust in myself, that I connect with that inner self that I speak of when I did Blind to Sixth Sense, which was again a very pioneering exhibition that still hasn't been done in this country, where I put 6 depicted pieces of artwork which all depicted the senses and a sixth sense in a pitch black gallery space, and then I invited the audience to interpret the work. And the premise behind that, again, was about finding the inner self, the inner trust, the sixth sense. It's a very, very similar thing when I surf. I'm literally trusting in my own freedom.
Does that feeling of hyper-vigilance go away? Or
Oh, it's not there at all.
It's not there
It's
at
the
all.
most beautiful, mindful,
Relaxing.
focused place to be. It is, I know I am safe. I trust in myself. There's no obstacles in the ocean, and I just fly.
In terms of your daily life, Victoria, you have spoken to me about discovering sight loss, retina pigmentosa, the condition is called, and I'm sure that there have been several experiences that have shaped you to be the wonderful person, the wonderful artist, the wonderful doctor that you are. In terms of the most generic questions in daily life, in technology with phones, how do you use it? Is there an app on the phone? Is there a specific app that people who are blind or have partial sight?
There's many.
Could you name a few for people to
Yes,
just know if...
I use an iPhone. So
Okay.
for starters, Apple are probably the best at providing accessibility that is built in. So I use on my phone VoiceOver, which is basically a screen reader which navigates the whole screen of any app, which makes then any app accessible. Sometimes it doesn't always work as well as it should, but that depends on the app developer, if they've made it in an accessible format or not. But 9 times out of 10 it does.
What are some of the apps that you use for
I use-
emailing and
Yeah.
getting around
Emails again.
research? And
Emails, I can use Outlook, I can use Gmail, and I can use Yahoo, because again, the phone or the iPad makes that accessible through the VoiceOver application. In terms of apps that help me read, for example, if I wanted to know what the label on my food was, there is an app that is called TapTapSee. There's also an app that is called Be My Eyes, which is really great. You can actually call somebody up, and I used to during COVID when I was doing my negative COVID tests. Obviously I couldn't tell if it was negative or positive, and you get to call somebody, one of the volunteers. The volunteers are all over the world. And somebody comes on your screen, and then you can just ask them, look, I don't know, what does this COVID test say, or can you confirm that this
Is negative.
Any question you wish that
I
is
can't
a
believe
cited
I
thing.
didn't ask you about COVID. That's another story
Yes,
of
quite.
living
Yes,
as
absolutely.
a blind person in COVID,
Yes.
which
Very
will
hard.
definitely have a conversation about.
Yeah, very, very hard, because you're in your own lockdown when it comes to sight loss, especially when you are in a transforming adaptive state. So when you've got to a rapid deterioration and you're struggling mentally, emotionally with that, and then to be locked down, and that is exactly what did happen to me in 2020. I unfortunately hit my final stage of sight loss, which launched me into, all I can say is a very white, thick fog. And it was isolating, very isolating. But of course we were in lockdown, which was also isolating. And I often describe it a bit like Russian dolls. So I was the small Russian doll in the middle, and then the Russian dolls over the top of me were the isolation layers. And it was very, very difficult to stay safe myself. People were in my 2-metre space. I wouldn't know that, So it was very difficult. And as somebody that uses the sense of touch a lot,
Oh God.
having to touch things when you're out and around. And of course, COVID was so prolific.
That you
It
can't
was
touch
on
this.
every
Yeah, you
surface,
can't.
wasn't it? So the vigilance that you had to, the hypervigilance is I was so afraid. I was beside myself when COVID.
Coping with that must have been a terrible time for you.
I had my mental health breakdown because of that. So I went into my final stage of sight loss. We all was in COVID as well. And I believe that is why my mental health took such a dip. And to be fair, I'm still building that resilience back. It changed my life entirely, utterly. I lost what vision I had. My marriage broke down. I left the home that I lived. I walked away from my career. I walked away from my studio because my studio was in the home. And I just felt like things couldn't have got any worse, But I think sometimes you have to hit rock bottom. You have to blow everything apart to rebuild and reconstruct, but probably in a much more kind of adaptive way with strong foundations. And I believe that's what I've begun to do from 2021. I started to build my own autonomy, my own sense of identity, and become the woman that I'm thankfully still and always will be growing. I will always be open to growth and evolving, but I'd like to think that I'm a better woman for that.
Victoria, honestly, I do know, and I can see your phones notifying you that you have to be somewhere. So I won't keep you any longer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. And
You're welcome.
your story is something that represents a lot of people who are facing sight loss, who are blind, who have any sort of disability, and they feel that hypervigilance. They feel the lack of ability sometimes, or the lack of accessibility to do things.
Yeah.
Your story is a testament
Thank you.
to accept your situations and come out of it, even when you have to keep hitting rock bottom again and again, more often than anyone would like. And I know that this conversation can go on and on for hours and hours. So just before you go, could you please leave a message for the people who are listening, whether they're disabled, whether they are fully abled and not grateful for the life they have, or not using the most of their times, and you have had different experiences traveling the world, difficulties in relationships, sight loss, being an artist, several different things, completing a PhD. So is there any message for people before you go? And I know you're running late, so...
Life doesn't come around many times, to our knowledge. You only have one life, that we know. So therefore, live it. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Allow yourself to be beautifully imperfect. Love yourself, have self-compassion and empathy. Know who you are. Have your own autonomy. And above all else, stay grateful for the life that you have, because life is precious and we should all most certainly make the most of what we've got.